35မှာနှစ်ထောင်ဘွားဒီကြောက်ကြီးမထုံးကားတဲ့မြမပြေတိုင်းပြည်ကိုအမောက်ချချောက်ကဘာကတွန်းချမဲ့ထားတွေစောက်ကြောအကျွန်းသားထမနေပိုးရှာမဲ့နာရီအတွက်စွန်းစားမဲ့ကဘာမချေလန်ရှူးရေကနေကိုစေးခတ်ပြီးပြေးမယ်လေးဘက်ကြီးတွေနဲ့ညဆိုခွေးနဲ့ကြီးတွေစငါတို့ကပေးဆက်ပြီးသေးတယ်မင်းတို့ကသွေးပြက်ပြီးချေကွဲမမေ့လျက်ရှိနေမယ်အဲ့ဒီနှွေးတမ်းမရှိနေစွဲတပိတ်မောက်တာတန်မုံတီးရဲ့မင်းစားရေတောက်လို့ TV ဂရမ်မှာစိုက်ဝါးတွေဖြတ်သေးမားတွေရှောက်ထုတ်ဝင်တန်းတွေ CDL လို့ကျင်းသားတွေမောင်းထုတ်ဖို့ရက်ကွက်ဝင်းတကားမှာကင်းသမားတွေစောင့်လို့မေသားတွေနေစားကိုမြေချကရက်တယ်တန်း60နာကတ်တွေဝေဝါကပြက်ပြက်တပိတ်ချောင်းတွေလမ်းတွေပေါ်ကိုရွေရှာကတက်မယ်မင်းတို့လက်အောက်မှာနေရတာထပ်သေးရတာမြက်တယ်တွေ့တိုင်းမှာ
I'd like to welcome everyone tuning into this episode. Many of you now listening likely have a measure of personal freedom and liberty in your own lives, freedoms that the speaker you're about to hear from no longer enjoys. I don't say this to make anyone feel guilty, but to offer a reminder that we're very fortunate to have a degree of agency and safety in our lives that our upcoming guest and everyone else in Myanmar these days can only dream of. So after you hear their story, please consider how you can use your freedom to support or advocate on behalf of the Burmese people. Any action, no matter how small, counts. Now, let's hear what they have to say.
History is written by the victors in the blood of their victims. When resistance is met with hostility, retaliation becomes duty.
Well, it's been about a year since we last heard from John, which we talked to him just months after the coup developed. So we're checking in with him again to hear about what has been a very eventful and full year and see how his life and perspectives and role has changed. So, John, thanks so much for taking the time to join us once again here at Inside Myanmar podcast.
I'm glad to be back.
Right. So before our interview, I had asked you to just take a moment to listen to our interview last year that we recorded, just to remind yourself about what we talked about, what you were saying and feeling and doing at the time. So let's jump right into this one by referencing the one from last year. You mentioned you listened to that just yesterday. What were your thoughts and reactions when you heard that interview again from last year?
Well, my first reaction was there was a lot of things that I was naive about and underestimating how the situation is and all that. But yeah, so now I'm a bit more, how to put it? Yeah, now I'm a bit more focused on what to do and what I've been doing in terms of the revolution and in terms of, still fighting against the junta.
Right. Which things stood out to you as being naive from the last interview?
Well, last interview, one of the main things that I was, I was still walking towards was this, the peaceful resolution of this whole coup and the situations of Myanmar. And so right now, it's more like, you've probably heard that, everyone's probably heard the news of how armed conflicts and all the armed conflicts have risen in the past year, and how from defending from protest lines, those people who were defending from protest line have now come into taking up actual arms and defending like against their rights in a more how do you call it, a bit more grim way, I guess.
Yeah, certainly in those first few months, which is when we talked to you at that time, there was a real hope among the activists and the protesters and those supporting democracy that they would be able to hold out and resist nonviolently, and a real commitment to that ideal. However, as we know, the military struck back, and they struck back very hard and very brutally and violently. And shortly after our interview at that time, on the ground in Myanmar, many of the groups were forced to decide, many of the individuals, what were they going to do? Were they going to leave the country in exile and try to work away from Myanmar? Were they going to leave the movement and just kind of go back to a more passive role? Or were they going to enter into something of armed resistance and armed training, given the changing situation? And I think this transition is quite possibly the most important development since the coup happened, and likely also the most misunderstood, especially outside of Myanmar, where it can fall back very easily, unfortunately, into this kind of non-nuanced understanding of, well, it's just both sides are being violent and there's people caught in the middle, and it's really unfortunate. And so I think understanding this transition is really, really important, especially for those outside who weren't faced with what was happening inside the country. So as someone who lived through this, I mean, for those who haven't listened to your first interview, and we really recommend that everyone should, you were a nonviolent protester in the early stages of the resistance to the coup. You were arrested, even though you were nonviolent, and put into insane jail for a month, and spend some time describing that experience last year. And then you came out of that experience outside of prison and wanted to continue working as a documentarian, which was your profession, and finding ways to support the movement. That's where we left off with you last year. Shortly after that interview was when the nonviolent protests were no longer possible based on the terribly vicious and violent crackdown of the military. So looking at this transition period in a bit more detail, as someone who lived through it, and not just lived through it, but were actively participating in every stage of it and being punished for that participation before it turned into an armed resistance, what can you describe about the nature of that transition that those of us who weren't living through it and impacted of it wouldn't be able to understand by not being there, that we might be missing from what it felt like and what was actually happening on the ground as someone as yourself who was just so intensively involved in every stage of it?
The first thing that the first advice that I could give is this military is a really intelligent in a way of like they're really strategic about how they handle crackdowns and how they handle governance in a way of their own structure. So, and the way they have done it before, previously, even with the Rohingya crisis and all that, was they keep feeding false informations to the media all the time. So I think for those who are outside of Myanmar and who are still trying to keep tracks of what's happening in Myanmar, the main important thing is to realize what is the military propaganda and what is actually happening on the ground, right? So try to as much get to the source before they actually, how do I describe it? Before they actually comment on anything rationally, rather than trying to get the correct information.
Right. And so you're describing some of the tactics the military has done and how they've definitely contributed to confusing the message outside of the country as to what is really happening. From your perspective and your point of view and that of your colleagues and peers, what was that transition like where you had to decide when it was no longer possible to continue the kind of civil nonviolent resistance as has been going on, and one was forced to make a decision of what to do next, how to respond, how deeper to go into the resistance with the risks inherent in that. What was it like for you personally to have to make that decision as to what you were going to do and how far you were going to go?
Well, since even with the nonviolent protests, right? Since day one, military since 1988, they have used actual live bullets and like killed hundreds and hundreds of students. But it was scratched in history. So for me, even when I was protesting in the earlier interview as well, like I was already ready to get shot or killed on the street. So since the nonviolence protest day, I've already prepared myself for the worst, that one day I might get shot and die. So that was my first stage preparation for this transition since the coup happened. But then now seeing the progress of how people have reacted and how they've been reacting to certain things. So people have, it's a way of trying to find ourselves, how to defend ourselves. So at first we were only seeking for help, crying for help, and trying to protest in a way that we only know how, because we never taught how to fight back violently, to respond to things with violence. So we were asking nicely for a period of time, and all that we got was the retaliation and the violence upon us. So at one point then people have started to just retaliate what they have done back at them, and only then they have started taking us more seriously, rather than just protest or crying for help, and then we would just disappear in months or something.
Right. For those people that are outside the country and are watching this armed resistance develop, perhaps with some concern, just that that this could bring about greater overall violence, and the concern about that development, and perhaps not understanding the wider situation and what you're going through directly, what would you want to tell them to give a deeper, more realistic understanding of what the situation is that would complement or affect or speak to their competing concern they have with just generally a widening violence that an armed resistance can create?
I think most of the people who are outside of Myanmar and who have not been in the violent situations are mainly concerned about the civilians and how their well-beings are affected, right? But for Myanmar civilians, the really beautiful things is if those refugees who had to flee, they had to flee for their livelihood and all that, yes, but deep down, they are still supporting the armed resistance side and not the military side. Yeah, so that is one thing that has still kept us motivated enough to keep this movement going and keep doing what we've been doing for the past 4 years now.
Right. So going back to your listening of this interview last year, one of the things that struck you was this naivete, that you were naive as to what it would take to overthrow a violent, repressive military. And you've been going in a different direction since then. Is there anything else that stands out from hearing that interview that struck you from how much things have changed or you've changed personally from the last year?
From last year, I was a bit naive in a sense because I thought, these people are as educated as us or as understanding and have empathy towards other human beings as a normal person would. So I think that's where my naiveness was. But after studying them throughout their actions day by day and every day's incidents, these are not the type of people that we can have dialogues with.
This is the military you're talking about?
Yes, this is the military. This is the military. So they're not the type of person we can sit down in one room and talk, because they will just, be ignorant and just doesn't care about other people like how normal people will react or normal people will care. So, I mean, for me as well, I've been more confident and much more careful in what I do. Like I'm still doing all these not protest movement per se, but I've been trying to commit my knowledge and what I've known and try to help out those who are still fighting in the front line in any ways I can. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You're saying that one of the ways that you felt you were naive is in not properly understanding the enemy and thinking, perhaps hoping for more humanistic ways of relating at some basic level. So that begs the question, what do you think they want? What is their goal? I think there's a lot of things said and attributed to them, and there's definitely a way to look at this organization as just pure evil, kind of mafia terror. But trying to look at it a bit more analytically and a bit more objectively, and the answer might be different for the soldiers on the ground and the commanders and then some of the top generals. But if you were to take a step back and really just try to understand who are these people we're up against, what is their end game? What do you think it is that they actually want out of this?
I think what they really want is their is power, total control. Like I think going down to Myanmar history, right? Like we've been ruled by kings, so I think it all came down. They think they're above everyone else, and they think they're royalty type of shit. Mm-hmm. Sorry, am I allowed to swear on this?
You're allowed to swear, especially when it's about the Tamada. Yes.
Okay, good. So I think that's what have made them a bit more, stupid and closed off from the rest of the normal human being, because one, they think what they want is their end game is they want total power, total control, right? So everyone else who oppose them, they're only now seeking to eliminate us or kill us. Mm-hmm. And right. Even before, when I grew up, I didn't know much about it, but there were certain videos of 88 movement that wasn't allowed to be publicly viewed, or we're not allowed to discuss it in public. And before, I don't understand why that was a big issue, but now I realize they're really trying to delete history and then try to create their own empire type of things.
Right. So So you reference how you think they want total control, and that's on a personal level. Definitely, you can look at despotic and dictatorial rulers in different time and places in history and the total control that they want. So that's kind of a given. I'm also curious what, with that control, what do you think it is they want to create? What do they want to build? Certainly they want the personal control of riches and influence and those types of things. But beyond that, which one can say is kind of universal for despotic leaders, they also probably have a vision of what they want Myanmar to look like and what kind of country and society that they want to manipulate and control in existing there. So what's your idea of what you think their vision would be for the type of Myanmar they want to control and build?
I mean, looking at now, this Mailo doesn't want to build shit.
Right.
Yeah, because looking at now how he's going about things is he's literally pretty much destroying the whole country.
Right.
And like, yes, he's like trying to build an army and constantly trying to build army, which is like power in terms of, which he thinks he will have powers when he have all these, guns and bombs and planes. But yeah, apart from that, he is like looking at how it is. Like, I think he's only looking out for him and his family, and for him to not just to get killed, because Melo is already like rich in terms of wealth and the things since the previous government, right? He already has the wealth, and he already has certain amount of influence and power with the public, with the whole country. So it's not like how he wants to build a better version of Myanmar. I think he just wants Myanmar to himself, and then everyone else can be his slave or some shit.
Right. Yeah, I think certainly there's an argument to be made that so much of what the military is doing are signs of desperation and really being over their head, which we'll get into later. But to look at now, looking at this military and how overstretched they are, in the beginning stages of the coup and the revolution, there was a lot of hope towards defection, police and military that would drop their weapons, change sides, or just kind of slink away, not follow orders. And there's certainly been a lot of work in those kinds of operations, and there's been some level of success. But it has to be said that a year and a half on, there are a lot of fighting units, ground units, that are continuing on. And I guess I'm somewhat surprised. I wonder what their motivation could be. I know that fear is a large part of it, and they're also kind of hostages in a way. But it has to be said, it's been a long time where these ground soldiers are still staying in their units, and we haven't seen defections in hugely large numbers. And you wonder about the morale and the motivation and the fact that they're not really winning a lot of aside from airstrikes, they don't really seem to be winning a lot of the operations they're doing. They're taking heavy losses. What are your thoughts on this? Are you surprised there haven't been bigger defections? And what are your thoughts on why so many are still remaining even after all this time, and what's not necessarily a winning campaign?
My thinking is like they've been brainwashed to the level of like whatever their leader is saying must be the truth, and what everyone else is saying is a lie. So this institution, this Melo's Damodar, has been like built off that type of system that a lot of people, when they turn their blind eye and just believe in someone, then they can still do crazy shit and like they don't feel guilty about it, right? So I think that's one of the big challenges that we're having, is trying to educate these soldiers that these things are wrong. But the other part of it is also that we've asked soldiers to do the movement and CDM and left the army and all that stuff. But right now, I think it's there hasn't been a huge defection from the army, but they certainly have lost morale on the ground, because they've been really desperately trying to like get the morale up of the soldiers. But yeah, they live in a very like inhumane, very poor condition. Like, I thought insane prison was worse, but to be in the army and to be fighting for those Melo Damodar is actually far worse than conditions of any prison, I'm sure. So it's the living style and the way that they put those soldiers through. So they pretty much put them through as slaves, right? Like, so they're the leaders, and then all these soldiers just have to like have no choice but to listen to these people and do what they've been told. Otherwise, there's no life outside of the military, and there's no life for them outside in the human world.
Right. Yeah, that's really tough. I want to track your own involvement since we last spoke to you, as far as you're comfortable in sharing. So just share whatever you can, or if something needs to be said a little more general or something left out, I leave that to you. But when we left off on our last interview, you had just recently been released from prison. You were reintegrating into society and your family and looking to how you were going to support the resistance movement. As we talked about at the beginning of this talk, everything changed when the military's response became much more violent and the armed resistance formed. So for you personally, what can you share about the direction you went in and the activities and roles and responsibilities you took on in the years since we last had you on?
Well, since I spoke to you last year, I've been a lot of the generation Z and the millennials have actively been protesting, right? So most of us, a lot of people have turned to an underground guerrilla warfare movement type of fighters, and those who could not be stayed in the city sites anymore have moved out to the ethnic camps and started training and all that. Yeah, so I have been. I can say that I am part of the UG movement. Mm-hmm. And I think for my safety and for everyone's safety, I think that's pretty much what I can share you at the moment, because I'm still in the country and I'm still in the city, still trying to, keep up the good fight.
Sure. So then, rather than talk specifically about what you've been doing, let's talk more about, for now at least, the feeling behind it, just the psychological and emotional shift of what it took to do something so different than your previous life and values. In the previous interview, for example, you referenced Buddhist meditation and the monkhood, how meaningful that had been in your life, this kind of path of peace. You were a documentarian, so in the creative arts and journalism, one can say, and you've shifted into looking at resistance that's not just nonviolent, but also trying to do whatever it takes to uproot the military. So just within your mind, psychologically, emotionally, what was that shift like in deciding to start to take on those roles?
Well, yeah, because since the protests, what we've been saying is like, we will fight till the end, right? Fight till the end as in like end of them or end of us, or yeah. So what I haven't shifted in a way of like from nonviolence to violence. I'm still doing both in a sense, because I'm still sending out nonviolent messages, and like still using and helping some of the artists and their platforms, and using art as a expression to deliver the message. But on the other hand, I'm also participating in all these underground movements, and because that's what gets the message to their side, because they cannot be said with just the expressions, they have to be like said with actions. So they're not the type of person who will listen to other people. So they're the only type of person who will I realize they're the type of person who will take actions only when they get hurt. So that's what have shifted me into trying to do that. But I'm still a practicing Buddhist. I'm still a practicing Buddhist, and I still I still meditate sometimes, and I still went to monkhood and all that stuff. So I still do all my Buddhist practice. But when we're at war, like, we still do our spiritual stuff, but then we still fight to kill the enemies and stuff.
And what is that intersection like for you for pursuing a Buddhist path of introspection and inner peace on one hand, while also engaging in an armed conflict where the planned objective is very much to take lives and kill the enemy, because that's, as you said, the only message that is getting through to them. So is there ever a conflict between these two different parts of your personality now? Or do you find the spiritual side sometimes can inform or support in some ways the other work you're doing? Or how do you balance these two very different parts of your life right now?
For me, and where I stand in the movement, like I can show you this much is I still haven't actually, pulled the trigger on anyone. So that's still part of my belief, because I still haven't actually, been the one to actually do the violent stuff. But I believe in the psychological effects and the psychological impacts that the movement can bring up onto them. So what I've been involved in is a warfare type where it's affect them more in a psychological way. So I've been, so the movement I've been participating is not directly, pulling the trigger per se, but in a more of a psychological advancement that we will have for our side, and the reverse effect on their side.
Right. Have you had any moments of inner conflict or inner questioning of feeling that these two sides of yourself were at a divergence, or were you able to keep them kind of compartmentalized and segmented in different areas?
Well, because in the protest day, and while I was arrested, I made a lot of friends in Insane, and a lot of good friends who we become really good, close friends, because even in the Insane prison, we were trying to do the hunger strike in Insane. So there was a couple of mates that I've become really close with. But in this doing this UG movement and all that, I've lost a couple of friends. So this has become personal for me, and then personally meeting other fighters and personally getting to know other groups of fighters who are still fighting have kept me motivated, and to find that balance of what should be done and what's the right thing to do. So yeah, I've managed to keep that keep other people's other people's involvement together as a group, and that's what have kept me balanced.
Right. And looking at your identity, kind of what your identity is in the world, how you present yourself, how you feel about yourself. You've just gone through such an extraordinary transition that so few of us listening probably have done, and how impactful this year has been and the impressions it's made on you. So do you feel like your identity, what you bring to the world, who you are, how you're seen in public, or how you allow yourself to be seen, do you feel like your identity has also shifted, or your understanding of your identity has shifted in this past year?
For the identity I've presented to the world hasn't shifted, and that's what have been worrying my family a bit, right? Because since day one, because my dad grew up, and did business with the military and all that, so he has always been since day one of the coup, he has always been giving me the option of, you could still work with them and make good future, right? So so I can say my identity hasn't shifted in that sense, because since day one, I'm not I cannot work with those type of people. I cannot be doing all the wicked thing that they'll be doing to other people just to get their just to get fame or money or power or whatever. So I'm naturally not that type of person. So that's how I have been. Yes, that's how I've still been true to myself in terms of what I've been doing. And that's how I've prepared for the worst, that, if I go down, if I go down doing this, there's no regret for me of what I've done.
Looking at your Buddhist practice, meditation and monkhood has been important to you spiritually. And as you've mentioned, you've pursued that as well. So you're a Bamar Buddhist, and I've spoken to other Bamar Buddhists, young Bamar Buddhists who've been in the resistance movement, and their relationship towards Buddhism, or one can say Burmese Buddhism, has changed over the course of the last year. Not so much, the ones I've spoken to haven't so much lost any faith in the historical teachings of the Buddha that came from India, but more a reflection on the way that state institutions in Myanmar have been actively manipulating the faith and concerns about the faith and the risks that it might be under, and that their eyes have been opened with that. And so I'm wondering for you if your identity as a Bamar Buddhist and your practice of meditation and your endeavor to want to follow the Buddhist teachings in that society, if that has gone through any changes in looking in perhaps understanding more of the course of the past year, how the military and the authorities, as you were growing up, were manipulating the faith, so to speak.
Well, it came down to the act of some of the famous monks in our time, right? Like, so when we were growing up, there were some monks that we look up to, and like some monks teaching that we've been following and like we've been listening to. And in this time of crisis, like some of those really famous monks have shifted in a sense because there's, I don't know what their intention or what their mindset behind their actions, but a lot of those monks have switched side, not switched side, but like have like actually abandoned what they've been teaching to us and really acting differently to what they've been teaching, and then what they've been, doing in terms of how to behave, in terms of, saying like, not to, for example, like not to, befriend a murderer or something, but then now they're actually letting the murderer like praise them and then like donate to them and all that stuff. So in terms of that not modern, but like current Myanmar Buddhism structure, the structure itself and some of the monks have changed. Yeah. For me, I was lucky that what the monk that I have and the monk that have taught me were not involved with these type of people. So I was lucky enough that I can still confidently, practice and like pray to the same monks, or like, do the same practice that I've been doing. Yeah.
So because these monks have continued to walk an ethical line and not be apologists for the Tatmadaw, that hasn't really created a conflict within yourself of the Buddhism that you follow. Is that correct?
Yes. The Buddhism that I followed wasn't the monks, luckily. So so like my parents, they will always be like, my mom like would be telling how great these monks have been, having a huge schools, or like how he's been, building all these incredible buildings and all that stuff, and like how much donation he's been getting from all these people. And I'm like, why are monks getting all the donations, and then village and village and monasteries are getting burnt in Sakai? So yeah, that's the controversy that's been happening here.
Right. And looking at that controversy that you just referenced, and looking at the fact that there are many people right now that are that do have some kind of conflict, in the sense that the certain Buddhist monks and teachings that they were really following and supporting, they now feel that those monks are not reciprocating and not wanting to stand up for them or support them or be on their side, and sometimes quite the opposite. I'm wondering about like a wider view. So we've just been talking about you specifically and personally up to this point, but in looking at the wider view and looking at the strength and the characteristic of Buddhism in Myanmar, and just the nature of Buddhist society that it is and that it has been, this current revolution, however it's going to end, whatever it turns into being in the society that's built after this, it feels to me that the lay sangha relationship and the Buddha's nature of the people and the younger generation, how they hold it, that some kind of transformation is going on based on this moment in this past year and a half. How exactly that plays out, I don't really know. I'm watching with interest, but it does seem that there's something that's shifting and that is going to transform into some other type of relationship. What that is, I'm not sure. I'm wondering your thoughts on that. Do you see like a wider shifting within society taking place, people questioning things that maybe they didn't before? And given the type of conversations that are playing out and that you're hearing, do you have any sense of where we might be going? What this relationship and between lay and sangha and the faith in general and Buddhist presence and nature of Buddhism in Myanmar, if it is changing, what it might be changing to?
I think like it has to change because the way we've been taught and the way we've perceived things and the way we've actually experienced things are totally different in on the ground. So like the change is definitely happening, but I think it's up to us to keep the history as is, so that the changes will be more dominant and prominent. But I think the changes comes down to that, of how Myanmar people and especially Myanmar Buddhists and the Myanmar Buddhisms are really like spiritual in a sense of a little bit superstitious. So, and like they want to turn to other people, like, in times of crisis, people will, most religious people will pray to their gods instead of actually going and, fixing the problems. And that's the things that's been most common with Myanmar people, is like the first thing we do when we're in trouble is not sort out how to get out of the trouble, but to pray first. So I think that that dynamic has changed a lot. So a lot of the people who are fighting now and like who've been fighting in the front lines, they will still pray on their regular basis, but they know more to take actions rather than to pray first and, to resolve to the higher beings of God or whatever.
Right. That's interesting. And it makes me wonder, as people are giving less of their mental focus to the religion and perhaps to the faith of the religion and more in their own independent agency and what they're able to do. Do you see that in the long run of perhaps resulting in a loss of faith of Buddhism, or perhaps that might be a dramatic way to say it, maybe just Buddhism becomes less important and less integral than it's been in the past? It's not quite as great a priority as it's been before this in a traditional sense. Do you see some of that shifting, or how do you see that relationship going?
I think that really depends on how Myanmar, like majority of Myanmar people, and how well and how educated they've become in the future, regardless of the outcomes, right? Because if the outcome is like, if Mailo wins and like Tamador rules for another 10, 20 years or 30 years, the result will still be the same, because they will brainwash the people and they will push the people into praying for higher beings that will save them. And so they will still keep this this level of civilization uneducated, so then they will not grow into trying to find their own radical thinking. Where I think if we win and if we get to keep this history and keep this history alive and what happened and how people respond and how people how the history happened, and if we keep talking about what have happened, I think the younger generation will have ability to decide on their own and like have a wider and better understanding of how actually Buddhism works.
Mm-hmm. You referenced the people that were on the front lines and how they are now relying perhaps on on their independent agency more than they are on the on just praying or having faith or something, that they're actually doing things on their own and becoming more competent and confident in their skills. That brings us into looking at this wider understanding of how the battles are going. I think for those of us outside Myanmar, it could be really difficult to have a greater overall picture and context as to what is actually happening operation by operation, the different battles and skirmishes, and how what the state is overall of the resistance, and particularly of the armed resistance, and how they're faring and how they're doing. We do hear things like the real lack of resources, lack of material that's going to support them, and how there are people in these armed forces, these armed resistance forces, that are very motivated, but they just don't have a lot of material to be able to carry that on. But as someone like yourself who is directly involved and has an understanding, is watching some of these things take shape, how would you describe where we're at now in terms of the armed resistance? I guess a kind of reductionist way to say that is, are we winning, or are the people winning? Are they coming out ahead? I'm sure the picture is a lot more complicated than that question indicates, but how would you give a general answer for someone that just hasn't been keeping up or paying attention, or doesn't really have a strong understanding of how the nature of these conflicts are going?
Like, to put it in a really simple sentence, it's like we're not winning yet, but they're losing for sure. because Mailo himself doesn't have a clue what he's doing, and doesn't know how to govern and shit. So they're not definitely winning. And for the front line and all the through all these difficulties that we're facing, and through all these challenges and all that, we are enduring, and we're trying to overcome. So each individual person, everyone who has been evolving to the stage of how to do and how to prepare themselves mentally, and how to keep fighting the goal, and to reach the goal in a more effective way. So I think so we are winning in that sense, because to look at it, our soldiers are motivated, and our people are still determined and looking forward to that day that where we can rebuild Myanmar in a much more liberal and much more open environment, rather than these Mailo's group and being their lapdogs and following their whatever their stupid commands that they try to shift out. Yeah.
I really like that response. You're not winning yet, but they're definitely losing. That definitely gives a general simplified picture of trying to understand it. If they are definitely losing and you're not winning yet, what will it take to push you over the edge? What will it take to take that momentum and that possibility, that potentiality, and take away the yet factor, so that you actually are in a position where the momentum is falling on winning?
So for us to win, right? So this military is trying everything in their power and every wicked way in their wicked book to diminish and to break the reputation of the movement of our people. So I think like it's really I don't want to get political, but it's really important that people who are outside of Myanmar and people who are inside of Myanmar as well. I think it's really important for us to keep giving out the true information and like keep being true to the facts of what's happening on the ground and what we need and what's been given to us. If the transparency from the government to the people is clear, then I think for us that will be a quicker way for us to reach to the victory. Yeah, because some of the informations that even from this from the NUG government side, some of the informations that they've been giving us, some of them are like, because there's still, some of them are vague and some of them are not effective in a way. So I think like they have to just keep listening to the people, and then if they try to meet their words for their actions, then I think that will push us quicker to the victories.
Can you give some examples of what you mean about incorrect information that's giving a misunderstanding?
Well, I mean, like, because like in the early days, right? In the early days when NUG government was formed, and that one of their minister just bluntly put out statement that NUG have an air force now, without actually having the resource in the background, or like without actually having the deals of any resource or materials behind to back them to their action. And it's been a year now, and that delivery hasn't actually been on ground yet. So that is one of the example I can give.
So that seems to me to fall in the category of false optimism, which has definitely been something that other activists have complained about and expressed concern, is the damage that false optimism has been doing.
Yes, definitely. Because we know we need this, and we need this, but like if when they say they have it, then they have to deliver, right? So that's the kind of falling into the same pattern of this government that we're trying to fight, which is what we don't want. So for me, from the activist side, trust me, I'm still talking bad about NUG as much as I'm talking bad about the military.
How would you characterize the relationship between the leadership at NUG and those on the ground carrying out operations?
They've definitely progressed, and they're definitely listening. I think the main challenges they're having is the lack of human resource under their ministries and all that stuff. Like to actually, because like right now everyone's focusing on fighting, right? And then no one's focusing on, not no one, but like less people are focusing on, like less people are putting energy into administration or like all these other things that we've had difficulty in the earlier years of like having the camps, and then the camps will have to have a huge problem and the issues of trying to manage and doing the proper funding, fundraising things, and all the other stuff that comes with it. But right now we're in the stage of quite a stable situations on ground. But it's just from the government side of it, like if they keep giving out those false optimism, then that's not going to get us anywhere further, and people are only going to lose faith on them.
You say that things are stable now on the ground. Can you clarify what you mean by that? And stable in what way?
I mean, stable in the sense like before the main thing was like, I've actually seen some camps which are like, there's like hundreds of people in the whole camp, and there's only like 5 or 6 guns to protect themselves. I mean, 10 guns, but and it's all so those type of things. And we've gone through a lot of some of the camps have gone, not some of the camp, I think I can say most of the camp has gone through all these some people run away with their fundings, and some people just use their fundings for their personal things and all that stuff, and a lot of the fundings were also went into just feeding the soldiers and not actually being able to buy guns and all that stuff. So right. I think so those situations in this past 6 months, I think they've progressed, and those type of problems have been resolved. So I think we're on a good climb of progress.
We do hear a lot in the news about the lack of materials and resources like weapons that the armed resistance has, and the difficulty of getting those. Is that still a concern, that what you see, or the people, the fighters that you're in touch with and you're supporting, did they have adequate material to be able to carry out what they're doing, or are they still lacking in extreme ways?
I mean, we're going as one of the biggest military institution in the Southeast Asia. So compared to them, we're actually still lacking in terms of firepower. But on ground in terms of the infantry troops, we've I think we're good in a sense. These for example, in Sagaing regions, some of the regions in Sagaing, they cannot claim back any lands, so they just keep burning villages, and they just keep burning down towns and villages. So and they just keep doing the airstrikes and bombing the areas. So I think the next weapon we need is to shoot down some planes, I guess. But in terms of ground, and in terms of the ground, I think we're pretty good for now.
So that's the countryside you're talking about, and you're talking about some of the areas of the countryside that the resistance has claimed and that the military is not able to get back. And so because of that, they are going on these rampages across the Sagaing division, especially, where they're burning, they're killing, they're looting, they're doing all these terrible things, and airstrikes as well, which many see as a sign of desperation, that they're not able to win battles against the resistance that are put up by the PDF. So instead they take their vengeance on defenseless people, or go from the air just almost out of this anger and desperation. That's the countryside. How about the city? Have there been changes in the city? Would you say city life is kind of normal, kind of stable, in the sense that if someone were to just drop in Mandalay or Yangon, would they even see things looking differently? Are things kind of somewhat back to normal in terms of businesses and restaurants and whatnot? So what's been the contrast in how the cities have been progressing?
The city has been progressing in a more of Yangon, especially, a lot of people have to go back to work, right? 6 months into coup, or 10 months into coup, people were still pushing out all our resources. But now a lot of people have been forced to get back and run their business to find a living, because countryside, with the countryside, it's easier to support and stay without, with the low cost, and with a sufficient amount of ration, and do it and all that stuff. But in city, a lot of the people, and a lot of UG people, especially UG in the underground fighters in the city, are facing is the living expense. So a lot of people are forced to get back to work and a lot of people are forced to reopen their business and all that stuff. So Yangon, Mandalay, and probably Naypyidaw is a little bit back to normal, but in Yangon there's still there's still bombs and stuff happening once or twice a day. So yeah, there's and the protests actually, like, because a lot of the UGs and some of the UGs, there's a lot of UGs that are still just doing protest movement, and they're still being like actively doing the protest movements.
Right. And that segues into the next question I wanted to ask, which is about the general feeling or sense of the democracy activists. I mean, a year and a half is a long time, especially when it was so sudden. And the conditions have been so difficult. The collapsed economy, lack of opportunities, the internet outages and electricity and problems with water and so much else that has really been difficult, to say nothing of the extreme violence of the military and what we've seen with them. And so I'm wondering what you feel is the general sense or state of the morale of the people. Of course, there's this false optimism as well that kind of gets you excited and hopeful. Maybe this week or around the next corner, you're going to see some major development and victory is going to be ours. And then there's this letdown. It's like a sugar rush that just gives you this sudden excitement and then just kind of drops you down a bit depressed. And I can't even imagine the pain and the loss that people have to go through from losing friends and family or being injured or imprisoned, or the trauma that comes from so many things. I mean, I've heard reports from some of the ethnic areas in Sagaing Division that children can't even hear loud noises without being traumatized of airstrikes coming overhead. So in terms of the morale of the people, what are you seeing there? Are you still seeing a real determination and positivity and belief, or have there been some kind of ups and downs and fits and starts of just how difficult it is to maintain this for such a long period of time and have to go through these difficult conditions for so long?
Yeah, so I think for Yangon and some of the main city, a lot of people who've gone into depression and all that, going back into history as well, like when I was growing up, and like some of my older cousins and especially my parents' age, right? Like a lot of people were like really drinking alcohol, so like and some of my older cousins have lost to drug abuse and like drugs overdose and all that stuff. So like I think we're going back into that circle of right now, like people are depressed and people are still like in such a tight living condition and like close living condition that people are resolving and like going into usage of all these substances and all that. So I've definitely been seeing a lot of much more people, younger people in Yangon, like going out and drinking, but not actually, enjoying per se, like back then when back 2 years ago. Like so yeah, so to this day, that even like I would still go out sometimes, but like even when I was going out, like I would not stay till a certain period of time, and like I could not like fully just have fun and let loose because there's so much going on. And for me, like in the city, like I would only go out on special occasion, like friends' birthday or something. But even then, like it's still a process of like people are trying to cope. Like it's human survival instinct. Like they will just try to cope with whatever the situation they've been thrown to. But so some of the people in the main cities are trying to cope, but definitely their actions are not helping in terms of who are people. For example, the children in Sagaing facing all these traumas. So yeah, it's definitely a unfair how do you say it? Like it's the unfair balance of how things are going around the whole country in terms of how some of the places are being really like facing the effects of the violence and all that, but then some of the big cities get to live a kind of almost normal life. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, certainly there's a disproportion of that. And the general mood of the populace, of the people, that we know that the military is extraordinarily unpopular, and whether someone is active or passive or anything in between, that there are very, very few supporters, that so many people have been harmed and traumatized in some way now or in the past. What do you get a sense of, like, the overall feeling or morale or optimism? Do you feel that people are kind of checking out more and losing hope, or losing that optimism? Or do you feel that even a year and a half on, there's still an overriding sense that it is going to be to the end, as you say? I know that you and your peers are on the far end of your activism and your and the actions and operations you're carrying out. But in looking at the wider population, who maybe doesn't have the same mindset as you, where do you think they're at? Do you think there is still a really strong hope and desire to keep this going and keep the momentum? Or do you think people are wanting to just kind of let go and have some semblance of a life in front of them?
I think a lot of the people, most of the people have tried to as I said, try to adapt and, try to survive in this type of situation. But people have never actually not forgotten about what happened. And so once we have once the revolution side have proper control of some of the areas, then I think, if the time comes again, people will unite in terms to go up against this military and to show power, because I think it's already been about 4 or 5 months that NUG or the other people protest of we've used to do silent strikes, which still shows that we're not participating in the movement, right? So even this year's Dinjan was still no one goes out, and everyone still shows that they're still trying to show the movement of our true feelings. So yeah, I think people are just on the outside, it looks like everything's almost back to normal in the main cities.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, if the time comes and if we need to rise again, I think people will be coming back up.
Right. And I was also asking that just because that's obviously what the military wants. They want people to forget about it. They want the outside world to lose attention and lose focus. And they want the people in the country to just kind of throw their hands up and say, enough of this. I would rather have some kind of life that's very oppressive and without opportunities and a great economy than just having nothing at all. And that eventually the people would lose, or the mass of the people. There's always going to be people that resist them, but the mass of the people are gonna lose some kind of hope and go back to normalcy. But you're saying that even as it might appear this way on the surface, that there's some going back to normal, and some of it's necessitated by just needing to survive, that it's more of a standing by state of a slow momentum building towards something greater that will start to show itself above the surface. Is that correct?
Yeah, because in the state in Yangon, right, there's especially in Yangon, there's been a lot of arrest, and there's been a lot of the military has up their games in terms of the arrest of people, and they have it's not because they were intelligent. They were pretty much arresting every teenagers or every millennial they see. And so amongst them, because amongst them, that they incite fear into the mass population. So whoever got arrested on wrong charges or wrong accusations still have to go through all these hell, and that their families still have to go through all these hells of worrying and like, you know, how well they've been doing and like how their well-beings and all that stuff. So they've managed to incite they've managed to place that fear amongst the people. But I think like for the people even in the Yangon, like people, when we hear explosions and when we hear gunfights, like we still get excited in terms of like, you know, oh great, and like just praying that none of our frontline fighters were injured, and like everyone still support highly to this day.
One of the new developments I've heard about since the armed resistance took shape is the use of drones. Drones can be quite effective, not having the Air Force that the NUG claims that it has or will have. Drones at least can give some kind of air reconnaissance, and there's even been attempts to arm drones, so they're not just giving you a bird's eye view, but they're also being a destructive force. What has been your understanding of the role that drones have played in the resistance?
I think that was the one of our greatest technology that has given us advantage in terms of trying to fight back to their defense line, because in some of the rural places in the high hills, they will have their heavy artillery mortars, and into a single direction of this town, they will just continuously shoot those things like 20, 30s, up to hundreds per day. The whole day they will just keep shooting all these artilleries into these directions of where the main population is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the use of drones have actually managed for us to break their formations into those like highly unreachable place with the normal bullets, right? So like, yeah, right. As I said earlier, like we only have normal bullets and like homemade bombs and stuff that we've been using. So now they've managed to use these drones to attack the enemy's defense line. So yeah, it's a great advantage that we've got for that.
And how have the drones been employed to be successful in that area? Are they doing more of the armed missions, or more reconnaissance, or a mix of the two? And in what ways are they being used to the greatest effectiveness?
Like we're using. Sorry, they're using everything we can get. They can get their hands on. So so for the civilians, we'll be using some types of drones for civilians, and then for carrying explosive and dropping to certain locations and all that. So it's funny how drone technology was invented and how we're using this in the warfare, and so it has given us such a great advantage, and a lot of our people have like stepped up into like trying to learn this technology and then trying to like master this and then use it, and it's quite motivating to see how we're using all these drones and tech.
Right, the creativity has grown as the movement has taken shape, I suppose.
Yeah.
Just going back to your original interview again, I just want to touch upon your reactions to it and make sure we didn't leave anything out. Was there anything else that stands out to you when you listened to it, or was there anything that surprised you? Was there anything in it that you don't remember saying or don't remember feeling and had to pause and remember how much things had changed?
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that that surprised me was me thinking that the military would not, would not. Wait, there was one part where I was like, they will not hurt me because I've done nothing wrong, which was completely, so now I laughed at it because, they definitely just kill anyone. And right now they've changed their tactics into, rather than capturing anyone, like they are more focused into killing anyone. Like most of the people, like there's less arrest and more kills within this 6 months rather than the previously when I was experiencing. I think it's just for the international communities and the international government, right? Like there's a lot of ways that the Myanmar people needs help, but there's a way that they can help to really push the movement forward to get rid of this system in Myanmar and to have help Myanmar people have a better life and better lifestyle. So I think please help us any ways you can.
And how can they help? What would be for people listening that do want to support in some way? What are things and people listening, I'm sure, feel very far and very helpless from the carnage that's going on there. What can a normal person do outside of Myanmar that could be of help now?
I think it's the same answer. I mean, I will just give the same answer I've given last time, is to just keep telling our stories in a sense. Right? Because conversation opens up a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities for everyone, right? So I think it's important for if you meet a Myanmar person or if you see someone who is close to Myanmar or in touch with Myanmar, then talk about it. And then if you see someone who doesn't know Myanmar, educate them about it. And I think that's the only way that we can push the story of Myanmar forward.
Right. And that does actually go in the direction when we're talking about telling stories and educating and sharing what's happening. Basically, you're talking about journalism, some kind of journalism. And this conversation we're having now, we can say this has some journalistic element to it. We're just two people having a conversation, but it's recorded. It's going to be going out to a lot more that are going to listen to it. So this is one way that local journalism is trying to play a role. And I should mention that for those that don't know, that Inside Myanmar is bringing about several new podcast programs run by Burmese that are in the movement. Some are in Burmese language, some are in English. One of them, Myanmar Revolutionary Tales, is currently ongoing. It has had about a dozen episodes and interviews people in Burmese language of all kinds and stripes about learning more about the movement and different aspects of it. So these can all be called some local journalistic initiatives. Our platform is very humble and our team is very small, but we're trying to do what we can. But if we move beyond this conversation we're having, and this being one kind of journalism, and looking at journalism in general, and looking at local journalism and some of the local Burmese outlets, and then looking at some of the wider, bigger international Western journalistic outlets that are trying to inform people and educate people about what's happening. What's your call of that? What have you seen? What have you seen with journalism? And we should definitely make clear the task of being a journalist in Myanmar is extraordinarily difficult. It has to have a lot of sympathy for the risks and sacrifices that people go through trying to report and how difficult it is to verify information and whatnot. That being said, looking at the role that local journalism is playing and the role that international or Western journalism is playing in educating people and informing them about what's going on, what has been your evaluation of the past year? How has journalism succeeded or fallen short at trying to legitimately and accurately cover what's been happening?
For the local journalists and the actual facts of what's happening in Myanmar has been a bit harder because of the risk that every journalist is placing, right? But I think like for people who are outside of Myanmar and who are international journalists, I think they can and like just reach out to any Myanmar citizen and get the informations. And I think Myanmar people are willing to, report about what's actually happening on the ground, without the risk of, if they don't have the risk of their safety and all that. I think anyone in Myanmar or anyone who is in Myanmar, if reached out, is happy to report and talks about things and how they're actually facing.
Mm-hmm. And from what you've seen of what's been produced for the past year and how it's been covered, what are your feelings with that? Do you find do you find some reporting problematic? Do you find it accurate in terms of describing and informing a wider audience what's going on?
There was one particular incident which happened, and I think it was the journalist who is Myanmar but who is outside of Myanmar, and like who's still playing that high how you call it, who plays right into the military's hand in terms of like spreading propagandas that military wants to spread, which is local PDFs are doing the violence act. Like local, as a Myanmar journalist, there are a lot of Myanmar villages being built, burned down, and like there's a lot of Myanmar citizens being killed and their families being affected. And like for them, like there's a lot of content for, if they really want to do the actual proper stories, there's a lot of incident for them to like, get in touch and try to reach out and to good stories on. And but there was one incident where one of the journalists was just posting did a full article about how taking up and fighting against this junta is the wrong way of doing things, and like not actually having like a proper journalism type of thing, but then actually having like a spreading like propaganda type of things. So yeah, I think there was some of those incidents where a lot of people were, just delivering wrong informations, and not just wrong information, but like what the information they think is correct, but then that's not what's actually happening on the ground. Yeah, so just for Myanmar journalists, just because like, and for on ground as well, like right, like in Yangon, like a lot of the Myanmar journalists who had to flee and like now working from abroad, but like trying to report back on from Myanmar. Like Myanmar is not how they left it, right? Like they've left.
Right.
It's already a year that they've left, and like if they haven't been back here for the past 3 months or 2 months, or like if they haven't been really go into the deep details of what's actually happening in Myanmar, they should really just check up on their source and like make sure their source is correct and what they're putting out to the world is correct information, because it's a really sensitive issue especially with Myanmar, because even with since Rohingya crisis, right, like there's a lot of false information and a lot of false propaganda that's been spread from the military, and it's easy for a normal person and like to just fall into the belief of like, oh, they must be right, and like the other party must be wrong. So a lot of Rohingya people were affected by it, and like a lot of Rohingya people were called bad in terms of like bad reputation in terms of amongst Myanmar people because of the fake propaganda. So as long as I mean, like people like us, we will just keep calling out to those who've sent out wrong informations or wrong type of movements, how Myanmar should go about in terms of for the future of our country. Yeah.
Right. So this example that you cited of a Burmese journalist that was not in the country writing information that was very harmful and very inaccurate and gave a wrong impression, is this something you see as an outlier of someone, just kind of a bad apple that was either had bad intentions or was just horribly misguided and is a bit of an outlier from the rest of the journalism that we're seeing? Or do you see this as part of a wider pattern that is happening, that is ongoing, that's happening with other journalists, where it's just a wider problem of people, whether they're Burmese or not, but they're not in the country, and because they're not in the country, they're just not quite accurately capturing what's happening. Do you see that as a wider problem that's occurring, or is it just really one bad apple and one outlier?
I think for this case I'm referring to this is particularly just one bad apple, but
right.
But like for people, right? Like especially for Myanmar people, like I said, like it's easy for us to like just blame someone else and like say, oh, they're doing bad and this person is doing good because they think that person is doing good. So for all of the Myanmar journalists, just don't fall into that pattern of fall into the pattern of just putting their opinions on things, and just if they're going to do a proper journalism, do a proper journalism, and if they're going to do an opinion piece, do an opinion piece, and mark it as opinion piece. Yeah.
On the other side of it, one of the things I'm thinking, I spoke to Mrachel Tu, a very well-known Burmese journalist who had to flee the country and is currently in Spain, and he referenced the difficulty of reporting on stories that you're trying to be factual with, but that there was such a desire among the people to want to have feel-good stories. Again, this goes to the false optimism that if you were reporting, for example, that a certain battle did not go the way of the people, or that there's tensions or problems in the movement, or even corruption in NUG, or whatever the thing is to be reported on, if it's not good news, the people don't want to hear it. And that can be kind of understood because they're facing extraordinary difficulties and they don't want to be kicked when they're down. At the same time, there's responsible and accurate journalism that needs to take place. So I spoke to Mrachel Tu on the side of a journalist on that problem, and how that's navigated. You're not a journalist. You're not even even among the general people and masses that are resisting. You're playing a integral role in the resistance movement. You're doing this every day. You're risking everything to be able to win. So these are really high stakes for you, and you're really involved and invested. And yet at the same time, I'm sure you also understand that journalism has its own role to play, but you're also trying to win a movement. So where do you see this dynamic coming down of how journalism can still follow its own rules and try to be objective, and yet balancing that with the desire for the people to have freedom and you working towards that with everything you have?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I get what you say about Ranchotu, and that the reports of people don't want to hear bad news, but those are the facts on the ground, right? Like when we're needing guns and when we're getting killed because we don't have guns, that is the facts, and like that needs to put out to the world so that the world knows, and like if someone wants to help, then they can help. If we're only hearing like, oh, we're doing great, then like why would anyone want to help? Because if you're doing so great, then why would you need our help, is the question that the world will ask, right? So I think it's more important for Myanmar people to be more like vigilant, and to be not afraid to send out the truth rather than the good news, even for the NUG and all that, right? Like, because if NUG is saying something wrong, like you should like just say it straight to NUG's face and then get them to fix it, because we're only humans, so everyone makes mistakes. Everyone says the wrong thing all the time. Like no one can say the right thing all the time. So only when they're wrong and only when they know they're wrong, people can fix things. So, but if we just keep telling people what they want to hear, then we will just have more people like Melo in the country, out of the country, in the whole world. So I think it's really important for us to keep sending out a true message rather than a good message, or like a true story rather than a good story. Because like I think like for people, like people will get touched with what's more true than what's good to hear, because what's good to hear only lasted in our attention span for about 4 minutes, and then we move on to the next good one. But if it is actual truth, and if it is actual struggles that some of the people are facing, and if it really touched them, then it stays with them. So from the storytelling point of view, that's what I believe in. And like, so as a journalist, and I think they have a good platform to actually share the truth of what's actually happening in terms of the ground situation, so that people who need help can help, and then people who needs to grow can grow. So yeah, I think for me, from my point of view, I think it's more important to hear the truth rather than the good ones.
Right. So it's basically talking about a higher level of maturity that's needed to be able to handle and understand the news as it's really developing and being reported.
So yeah, right now the current problem the people and the activists outside of Myanmar are facing is the military and their embassy, Myanmar embassy especially, right, trying to revoke their passports. So when they try to renew it, they will just take the passport in and then not return it. So I think for the international community and international governments, there will be a way to help Myanmar people, but I think that's more on NUG's job and how they should go about it. But like, if for that, if a lot of Myanmar people can become just passportless and stateless, and then they will just like potentially turn into refugee rather than holding an actual valid passport. So yeah, I think for international governments to like, I mean, I send a letter to NUG, Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well. Like, why can we not issue an NUG passport type of thing, so that people can actually have the Myanmar citizenship and still be having a valid citizen passport thing, and just go about with their life outside of Myanmar.
This is also an issue I've heard about, and there's been a real fear among those Burmese that are abroad that how can they continue to legally stay in the country where they're at, and the danger of being stateless, of not being able to stay on legally, and also the danger of perhaps if they can't stay back, that they're sent back to Myanmar and they're in danger there. And so this is definitely something that's becoming a wider international political issue that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, and then I don't know what's taking NUG so long to act on it, or like I don't know what's taking people to like speak up about it. Like I heard stories like some of the people who got their passport revoked resolved to not speaking out as much as they should. So now a lot of people are confused of what's the real information and what's not the real information, because military again says like, oh, they're not revoking people's passport, and then people just tend to believe it, and then like the real story of the people who have their passport not being returned are not like put out into the public. So we don't know how many people are at risk, and we still have no clue of how many people are going through that trouble. But I'm sure a lot of people are going to go through it in the near future. So yeah.
Yeah, right. And that's something that's extending beyond Myanmar's borders and gets into this wider accreditation discussion. Accreditation not just of passports, but of embassies and who works in the embassies. Of course, the UN accreditation has been a big deal since the beginning, and who holds that seat. And this is something that I know Western governments have really struggled to try to understand where they can come down on, where they can recognize the existence of a state and yet protest against its leadership. And, it's just not an option for some Western countries to withdraw their embassies from Myanmar because their embassies are such sources of information gathering, running safe houses and aid and other things. And so I know that some of their hands are also tied, but one would certainly like to see them doing more, whatever that is. And even if that puts one in an uncomfortable place, I think that it's now this issue of accreditation, especially as it goes with passports and visas, is now spilling out beyond the borders and really having a risk at making people stateless or to put them in jeopardy and to force them to have to be sent back, where if the Burmese embassy in that country had tabs on what they were doing, what they were sharing, that they would be at immediate risk when they landed. And so this is something the NUG certainly has to sort out in conversations with these other governing bodies of how so many of its expats and refugees and workers and everyone abroad, the Burmese exile diaspora community, or at least those with Burmese passports, how they can be protected, given that all of the institutions right now of this military regime is bent towards not serving its people, but actually targeting its people. So it's that sense of a regime that is at war with its people is not just physically at war in the country, but as we're seeing with this passport issue, that they're legally and logistically at war everywhere they can be and taking the fight to them.
Yeah, exactly. As you mentioned as well, but we've given up hopes on UN in terms of
Sure.
how effectively they've been trying to help with the movement or trying to help to the people of Myanmar. But there's been thousands of cases of how this regime has been bad to their people, and I don't know what more what more of evidence that they need for them to actually act in terms of to act. So yeah, that's that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons why we have to that's one of the reasons why now we have to fight for our own freedom in terms of taking up arms and all these conflicts happen because we've been crying for help, but nobody was listening. So but it's good in a way because now we get to cherish our freedom if we actually win. When we win.
Yeah, and you're not alone in not understanding why there hasn't been that response. I'm just thinking of a few guests that we've had on in the past few months, and recalling what they've said. We had Liam Scott, who was works for the Global Center of Responsibility to Protect and is an expert in R2P. And one of the questions I asked him is, are there further lines in the sand the Tamarat could cross that would be one step too far, that would just be so extreme the international community would just finally say, okay, this is now too far. Now we have to find a way to do something. And Liam just kind of shook his head and said, I don't know what lines they have left. And he started listing off, they've done this, they've done this, they've done this, they've done this. I don't know what more lines they could cross. I'm thinking of an interview we had with a representative of the task force team at Amnesty International, Matthew Wells, who has been on fact-finding missions to Karenni State, among other places, to report, and he simply said that all the evidence is there. They've done extraordinary documentation. They issue reports regularly about the situation in Myanmar, which are compiled from a number of different sources and different analysis, and the information is all sitting there in front of anyone who wants to see it. And yet the crisis is just not coming on the desk as it comes on for other places in the world, that people are just not looking at the evidence and the comprehensive documentation of Amnesty and other human rights groups and not being acted on. And the final one that comes to mind is Hunter Marston, who's a scholar and has studied many different aspects of Myanmar over his career. And we had an interview with him contrasting Ukraine and Myanmar, and he said something similar. He just said, I don't know why it is that Myanmar's not getting the attention. I don't know if it's because it's in a different region of the world, or it's something Southeast Asia is seen as more exotic, or what it is, but it's not able to rise, and not just now, but historically, it hasn't been able to rise to the understanding of international attention and response. And so I think this, just to support what you're saying, is you, from your position and perspective, as you talk about the feeling of not being heard, not receiving help, not having it be a concern of governing bodies. This is something that even beyond you, people that are actively reporting and studying on this for their career, that they're seeing this at their level as well, whether that's human rights with Amnesty International, whether it's studying it in context of Ukraine, or whether it's looking at it in with regard to RTP, human rights. So, this is for whatever reason, this is the unfortunate situation that it finds itself in, and we're just hoping whatever we can do to change that. If these conversations can push that needle, or if further documentation or information is necessary. And in the meantime, as you said, you've pleaded for help and pleaded before any armed resistance formed, and no help of any kind came. And so many people have learned to be self-dependent and to do what was necessary to not sink into the oppression that the military is trying to create.
Yeah, and it's funny how the international people would not cry when military burned the whole village and killed 7-year-old kids, but
right.
then but then international people can be like, oh, PDF because of PDF, one civilian died, and then they make a huge fuss about it, and then they started making a huge deal about it. So I think that's the bias that's been getting for Myanmar side, for Myanmar people as well. It's when the revolution side did something, so the fuss and the damage of it is more impacted, rather than when military done it. It's just military doing its military things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, very unfair standards.
Yeah, I don't know where, in which country military is allowed to kill civilians, but civilians are not allowed to kill civilians, type of thing. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's very unfair standards and decontextualized narratives that are born from it, and so it prevents that proper understanding of the conditions that people are really facing.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I know it's very late there, and we've been trying to connect for the last few weeks, so really happy that we were able to make this time work, and thanks for being able to share what you can, understand what you're not able to, and just really wish you to be safe and to continued support for the democracy movement.
Thank you. And thanks a lot for having me again on this platform and getting to give me another opportunity to give an update on situations of how things are happening in Myanmar.
One of the most tragic aspects of the current crisis in Myanmar is how isolated Burmese protesters feel, and in fact are. Thankfully, through our nonprofit organization Better Burma, we're able to ensure that all your donations successfully reach their intended target on the ground. So if you found yourself moved by today's discussion and want to do what you can to help, please consider giving to our donation fund, which is 100% directed towards supporting the democracy movement. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go to support a wide range of humanitarian missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person, IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and much more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution for a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian aid work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org. That's betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause, and both websites accept credit cards. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either the Insight Myanmar or Better Burma websites for specific links to those respective accounts, or email us at info@betterburma.org. If you'd like to give it another way, please contact us. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.